If there were ever a backbone of the UNSC Navy, this is it. Everywhere the United Nations Space Command makes their presence known, you can count on seeing these ships, silhouettes imposing, and MAC guns pointed toward the enemy, as the first and usually last line of defense for humanity. From the insurrection to the New Phoenix incident, frigates have made up the core of the human fleet due to their relatively low cost and invaluable contributions in every combat arena. Hey people, Mark here, and welcome to Gamma Company Mark, and welcome to a colossal video. I took a poll and you said you wanted UNSC ship breakdowns, and I'm nothing if not a populist. This video took a while because it's basically 3 ship breakdowns in one, and I was going to include the post-war frigates, but I've decided to save them for another day. The reason I decided to do all the frigates in one video is pretty much due to how similar they all are, but still different enough to talk about individually. Before I continue, I just want to say that the response to the Halberd class is overwhelming. 40,000 views. I am blown away. I didn't expect such a response, and I really just started doing this because I thought it would be a fun second channel. But I think it's time to bite the bullet and just accept that this is my main channel now. Currently sitting at 603 subscribers when I had 25 3 weeks ago, so that's quite something. I have not had enough time to do a 100 subscriber video because as soon as I started, I hit 200, and I'm not even gonna bother with a 500 subscriber video because I've already hit 600, and I'm probably gonna hit 1,000 next week. So yeah, that's kind of mind-boggling, but thank you all for your support. I am very appreciative. But anyways, for this video, all information comes from Halo Warfleet Mythos, the Encyclopedia, Fleet Battles, and various other Halo sources, including a bunch of canon fodders, Waypoint articles, and other dev talks that happen to shed some light on these. Also, shout out to Halopedia, whom without these videos would be way harder. Do let me know in the comments if any of these stand out to you, or if you just like them all the same, or if you straight up hate UNSC frigates, that's valid too. This was a lot of work, so if it's not too much to ask, I would love a like. That would make me happy, and a subscribe would send me over the moon. Let's begin. While the 3 frigates were built following the guidelines of the UNSC standard of frigate design, and at a distance are near identical if you don't know what you're looking for, there are notable differences to be discussed. 3 known classes of UNSC frigate were fielded during the Human Insurrection and throughout the Human Covenant War: the Stalwart-class light frigate, the Charon-class light frigate, and the Paris-class heavy frigate, all of which were manufactured by Synovian Heavy Machinery and saw extensive use in both conflicts, more so than any other ship type. The Stalwart-class light frigate is the shortest of the 3, with a length of 478 meters, weighing in at 0.93 metric tons. Despite their unsuspecting size, ships of this class took part in the most critical moments of the war, and in many cases, were ultimately the key to humanity's victory. The Stalwart class will set the tone with its appearance: large, boxy thrusters attached to an otherwise narrow and long hull, differentiating UNSC frigates from other Navy vessels, which usually possess a design centered around a more central frame, with engines directly extruding from the rear. Requiring a crew of 250 naval personnel, and carrying a complement of up to 200 Marines and 64 orbital drop shock troopers, the Stalwart class was a powerful air asset in ground assaults, with the ability to deploy 6 D-77TC Pelican dropships, 12 M12 Warthog all-terrain vehicles, 6 M808 Scorpion tanks, and 24 Soev drop pods. Any UNSC force covered by a fully stocked Stalwart was not wanting for reinforcements. The Stalwart sports a Starworks FTL-290C Series 4 Koden Shaw Fujikawa Translite engine and 2 massive OKB Karman 56K fusion drives for both maneuvering and travel at sublight speed. The drives have 2 primary thrusters on each wing, with 2 secondary thrusters fitted less extremitously. Extremitously. Is that a word? Extremitously. You guys can get what it means. Extremitously. Like, not like if something is extremitus, it is an extremity, you know? Whatever, there's no word for that, I just checked. But it should be a word, it makes sense. The Stalwart's hull is composed of 60 centimeters of titanium A armor plating, and the ship's armament consisted of 16 M58 Archer missile pods, 76 M340A4 Streak missile pods, 6 M870 Rampart point defense guns, 52 M710 Bulwark point defense guns, and 1 Mark II light coil 56 A2D4 magnetic accelerator cannon, weapons smaller than many human warships, but nothing to scoff at, unless you're an average Covenant warship, that is. As with many UNSC ships, the MAC runs nearly the entire length of the ship, and unlike the Halberd class's MAC battery, only houses a single launch rail. Its lower boom houses the gun itself, while the upper boom contains the fire control systems and pulsed power storage. External power sources for max are necessary, much like the power capacitors aboard the halberd, so the ship doesn't have to power down every time it fires. Aside from its weapons, the Stalwart also possesses one magazine-fed coil gun accelerator cannon for deploying helljumpers feet first into battle.
Hoorah!
In naval combat, the Stalwart fills the role of a pesky escort ankle-biter, nipping at Covenant ships and occasionally firing off a full Mach round, with a genuine chance of damaging shields or even hull, providing the lead ship they were escorting was able to follow through, and that they managed to avoid Covenant energy projectors and plasma lances, which would absolutely skin them in one shot if well placed. Like many UNSC ships, the Stalwart is not without its flaws. Unlike the halberd, the bridge of the Stalwart is very visible, and while it has auxiliary life support systems for emergencies, it remains vulnerable if cut off from the rest of the ship, either by vacuum breach or fire hazard. Further, the externally attached and exposed engines leave the ship vulnerable to partial neutralization. The construction of these flanking engines is such that if one engine is disabled, the ship can only direct rear force out of one side, which would send the ship spinning in space and render its Mach, its primary weapon, effectively useless. The Stalwart isn't the most vulnerable to this, but captains of the Charon and Paris classes were wary, I'm sure. The placement of those engines could turn a near miss into a fatal blow. These issues, however glaring, didn't stop the UNSC from producing them in bulk alongside the Charon and Paris classes, their versatility and low production cost outweighing their detriments. Even without said flaws, ships like the halberd, Marathon, and other carriers and cruisers were still toyed with by Covenant ships of lower classes, rendering any slight flaw in frigate design more or less inconsequential. There are multiple known Stalwart-class light frigates that took part in battles throughout the war, least notable of which being the UNSC Stalwart Dawn. All that we know about this frigate is that she was present for the Battle of Reach and provided air support near New Alexandria on August 23, 2552. It was hailed by UNSC Army Sergeant Major Duval, who made the request for cover to facilitate the departure of several civilian Egret space liners from New Alexandria Spaceport, carrying hundreds of evacuees. The Stalwart Dawn was unfortunately unable to respond, leading to the destruction of a single transport, Transport 6 Echo 2, at the hands of a Covenant SDV-class heavy corvette. The Stalwart Dawn has not been seen or mentioned since, and due to the particular nature of the battle for Reach, especially around New Alexandria, I believe it's safe to say she was likely destroyed. The UNSC Meriwether Lewis, named after the explorer famous for the Lewis and Clark expedition, is one of the oldest UNSC ships still in service as of October 2558. Its status following Cortana's reclamation is unknown. In 2531, this ship was served on by, get this, Captain Jacob Keyes, not yet captain. When accosted by Covenant boarders, this ship survived a Covenant boarding, by the way, Keyes charged the aliens with nothing but an M6 Magnum, sustaining multiple injuries in the form of plasma burns, known to melt infantry armor. The man's bravery earned him a Medal of Honor, not the first or last honor for the UNSC to bestow him. Following the war, the ship worked in some capacity to require or merit a Spartan contingent, including then Spartan Commander Edward Buck, prior to his transfer to the Infinity, and then Fireteam Osiris. The UNSC Midsummer Night served in multiple battles and operations from 2535 until the end of the war. As a modified variant of the Stalwart class, the Midsummer Night was equipped with experimental Oni stealth technology, and is, in the words of Vice Admiral John Mawakizi, a long-range stealth ship, like a prowler, but she packs more of a punch. In 2535, the Midsummer Night was tasked with enforcing the Cole Protocol in the far reaches of the outer colonies. On a particularly notable excursion, the Midsummer Night detected a civilian freighter, Finnegan's Wake, drifting out of the Ictanus 45 system. A boarding party was assembled to ensure the ship's navigational data had been deleted, led by, get this, Lieutenant Jacob Key. The freighter turned out to be a trap sprung by insurrectionists. The boarding party suffered several casualties via planted explosives, but the rebels' goal to scuttle the ship with the UNSC personnel aboard was ultimately thwarted, all thanks to the keen strategic thinking of Keyes, who led the majority of the ODST boarders off the ship into safety. Shortly after this incident, Midsummer Night was reassigned to assist Oni operatives in Silion, the capital city of Charybdis 9, which was, fun fact, the home planet of Brohammer. The personnel aboard the ship were tasked with discovering the origin and location of individuals distributing Covenant weapons to civilian dissidents and insurrectionist sympathizers. Another civilian freighter named the Kestrel was found to be the supplier to multiple riot leaders on Charybdis 9. And after a Covenant fleet appeared in the system, said freighter fled, Midsummer Night close behind. The ships emerged at the Rubble, an insurrectionist-sympathetic human and Kigyar microcolony located within the asteroids orbiting Hesiod, a gas giant. After multiple excursions and altercations with both Rebel and Kigyar occupants, the Midsummer Night and her crew assisted the Rebels when their needle's edge peace with the Kigyar was broken, eventually facilitating the transport of the human rebels of the Rubble to a safer inner colony. Keyes continued to serve on this vessel until 2552, when he was transferred to the Iroquois, a Halberd-class light destroyer, to serve as commanding officer. Yes, that is how you say it.
Iroquois. Iroquois.
And finally, the most notable Stalwart-class light frigate needs no introduction. Responsible for one of the most critical moments in the entire war, and instrumental in stopping the firing of Delta Halo, in amber clad is one of the most recognizable names in the entire UNSC Armada. On February 9th, 2547, 16 Stalwart-class light frigates were launched from Naval Shipyard AS-9 on Reach. In amber clad was one of these frigates, and following the battles of Arcadia, Paris 4, and Iota, is the only surviving ship of that line. Following the destruction of her previous ship, the UNSC Hilbert, stupid f***ing name, get this, Lieutenant Commander Miranda Keyes was assigned to command the ship on April 7th, 2550. Afterwards, the ship found her home at Cairo Station as a part of the Home Fleet, and spent the final days of the war in orbit of Earth. In October 2552, In Amber Clad engaged a fleet of Sacred Consecration as it arrived at Earth, led by the dumbfounded High Prophet of Regret, who didn't expect any human presence, let alone the single largest human fleet in history. At the end of the Battle of Mombasa, Solemn Penance, a CAS-class assault carrier housing the Prophet, attempted to flee via slipspace. Unbeknownst to Regret, In Amber Clad was able to piggyback through the slipspace rupture. Emerging from slipspace, the crew and complement found themselves at Installation 05, Delta Halo. If Clad hadn't followed Solemn Purpose, the Covenant would have had unfettered access to the ring, and would have eventually sourced a human to activate it. Thankfully, John 117 was present to finally put a slow and painful end to Regret. While Johnson and Miranda halted the firing of the ring and killed Tartarus. Afterward, it's likely that Johnson and Miranda were shuttled back to Earth aboard the Shadow of Intent, courtesy of their newly converted friend, as In Amber Clad wasn't seen again until it appeared in High Charity, infected from stem to stern by the Flood. In Amber Clad intended to end its service with a bang, but was stopped when Cortana was intercepted by the Installation 05 Gravemind, which presumably prevented her from accessing the ship's systems using its natural mastery of what's left of the domain or some other weird precursor powers. After rescuing Cortana, Chief escaped with the Arbiter using a Pelican from In Amber Clad's complement. Clad's hulk was likely obliterated alongside the majority of High Charity when Master Chief overloaded the station's reactor and activated the new halo over the Ark, ending the war in 2552. Longer and lighter than the Stalwart class is the Charon class light frigate. With an enlarged hangar bay and significantly larger crew and marine complement of 782, the Charon class is more suited to deploying infantry and armor for ground assaults than its two sister classes. Its smaller mass can likely be attributed to its increased cargo capacity, with more space allocated to its extendable insertion bays. The ship is powered by a Naoto Technologies V4L deuterium fusion reactor, with two rear extruding engines for maneuvering, and FTL is provided by, same as the Stalwart class, a Series 4 Koden Shaw Fujikawa Translite engine. The Charon class shares engine placement with the Stalwart, only one primary engine per wing with two secondary engines closer to the inhabited portions. The Charon class is a bit of an odd duck, with fewer details available for her design. For example, while the exact ideal complement and crew are known for the Stalwart class, the crew capacity is simply listed as 782 in Halo Forward Unto Dawn. I know that's not just naval personnel, so some amount of that is presumably Marines and ODSTs. The exact amount of vehicles on board is also unclear. In-game, we can see that forces from the UNSC forward onto Dawn have deployed at least 2 D-96 TCE Albatrosses, 2 M313 Elephants, 7 D-77H TCI Pelicans, 3 M808C Scorpions, numerous Soev drop pods, M12 Warthogs, and AV-14 Hornets, but when comparing this to the Stalwart class, I think it's fair to say this was probably not a full complement. The presence and apparent use of Soev drop pods implies that the Charon class shares the design detail of a magazine-fed coilgun accelerator cannon for the deployment of ODSTs. The Charon's main armament includes a Mark II light coil 83 B6R3 MAC fitted on the upper boom rather than the lower, 50 M58 Archer missile pods, and 4 Rampart point defense guns. One might be tempted to say, due to possessing 54 fewer point defense guns and 42 fewer missile pods, that the armament, compared to the Stalwart, is pathetic. And that would be the case were it not for the Charon's 3 Hyperion nuclear delivery systems, giving a fully armed Charon class an entirely different role to play on the battlefield when compared to her shorter sister. It's unknown if this is the case for all UNSC ships, but the Charon class's weapons system can be accessed and certain weapons fired from outside the hull, namely the Hyperion nuclear missiles. An interesting feature. If there are any members of the Navy or Space Force in the comments, do let me know. Are there any ships or spacecraft in real life that would reasonably do this? I mean, I know there's no spacecraft that have nukes on them. Well, I don't know that. I hope. Oh god, let's move on. In any case, the nuclear armament of the Charon can, at close range, be a one-shot kill for unshielded or unsuspecting Covenant cruisers or lighter. Very impressive for a ship of its size. There are several notable Charon-class light frigates, including, of course, the lead ship of the class, the Charon, about which no details are known. The UNSC Aegis Fate was a Charon class present for the Covenant invasion of Reach and the Battle of Earth. It found its way to the Ark during the Battle of Installation 00, and sometime either during or just after the war, is known to have deployed the Albatross found on the Halo 3 multiplayer map Sandtrap, as well as the 2 Elephants and various human vehicles found there. Interesting side note, this screenshot from the unfortunately cancelled game Halo Online actually features the Aegis Fate hovering above the map just like it does on Sandtrap, which I think actually returns in spirit years later in Halo Infinite, although that is a Mulzan-class frigate rather than a Charon, which we'll cover in Part 2. The UNSC Chiaglosa was an ill-fated Charon that engaged the fleet of Sacred Consecration during the Battle of Earth, but it was cut clean in half, likely by a plasma lance. Battle Group Victory, a fleet of at least 7 Charon-class frigates, fired at the Forerunner key ship at Voi, doing predictably nothing. And an unidentified Charon extracted the final evacuees from Algolis in 2549, the members of the Hades Corps Demolition Squad, who you might remember were responsible for destroying this mech suit thing. I'm actually going to do a breakdown on this and a bunch of other mechs in the UNSC, so stay tuned. And that is the last UNSC-aligned Charon to mention other than the most famous one, which we'll save for last. There are a few Charons who were not UNSC, rather Colonial Military Authority commissioned, 2 of those being the CMA Arabia and the CMA Vostok, both a part of Battle Group 4 and led by a Hillsborough-class heavy destroyer. The group was deployed to Harvest to investigate the loss of contact with the system's populace. There, the battle group became the first UNSC naval forces to encounter the Covenant, and both Charons were lost to a single Covenant Razis-class interdictor, which was also responsible for the destruction of Harvest. The Bellicose was commissioned as the UNSC Bellerophon. What?
Bellerophon.
But when commandeered by insurrectionist forces, it was renamed, probably because nobody can say that shit. 3 times, this Charon was engaged by then-Captain Preston J. Cole, commanding an unidentified UNSC heavy destroyer. 2 of 3 times it escaped, and on the final engagement the battle was fought to a draw. One of the most impressive uses of a Charon, or sloppy uses of a heavy destroyer as there has ever been. On March 12, 2526, the Bellicose served as the meeting place of various rebel groups, including the Bico Independence Army, the Venetian Militia, the Secessionist Union, the People's Occupation of Reach, the Gao Liberation Force, and the Freedom League of Jericho 7. Later, the Bellicose fought without allegiance during the Battle of 18 Scorpii and the Battle of Psi Serpentis and was captained by, interestingly, Lyrene Castilla, Preston Cole's ex-wife. The Iliad was another rebel Charon and served as the flagship for Colonel Robert Watts, former leader of the URF. It engaged UNSC forces in 2513 during Operation Trebuchet over Eridanus. During the battle, it notably ripped a UNSC cruiser in half by attaching towing cables and accelerating. Finally, the most well-known Charon-class frigate is the UNSC Forward Unto Dawn, which was for years believed to be the final resting place of the Master Chief. The UNSC Forward Unto Dawn was a part of the 7th Fleet, which was recalled to Earth in September 2552 to serve in the conglomerate of fleets known as the Home Fleet, meant to serve as humanity's last stand against the Covenant. During the battle, Lord Hood used the humble ship as his flagship, later committing her to the aforementioned battle group Victory, which fired on the Forerunner dreadnought. After failing to damage the key ship, the portal to the Ark opened, and Truth made his way in with his enlarged Jiralhane fleet. Shortly after, a Covenant cruiser arrived and crashed, dispersing the flood into Voy. After the Shadow of Intent and a portion of the Sangheli Fleet of Retribution partially glassed Africa to cleanse the flood, the elites and humans followed Truth through the portal, with the Dawn now captained by, get this, Miranda Keyes, bringing along part of the 7th Fleet and the previously discussed UNSC Aegis Fate. Aegis Fate? Aegis Fate. After the Prophet of Truth was neutralized and Miranda was KIA, the Dawn was flown by Johnson to the incomplete Halo, the entirety of its crew either dead or aboard the Shadow of Intent or other Sangheli ships. Johnson parked at a couple kilometers from the control room, and after his death and the premature activation of the undesignated Halo, Chief and the Arbiter raced to the now-abandoned frigate. While making their final escape, the Dawn was ripped apart by the shockwave of the Halo collapsing in on itself. Her bow made it back through the portal and to Earth, but it's heavily implied that her stern, Chief Within, was intercepted by Mendicant Bias, who teleported it to Requiem as attempted recompense for his past actions. His goal could have been to help the Librarian reform the Didact. He couldn't have known that by then the Didact was beyond saving. In the years following, the rear half of the Forward Unto Dawn transformed into a Strident-class frigate, for some reason, and drifted as a derelict for some time before her distress signal was discovered by Jul Mdama's Covenant Remnant faction, followed by the Infinity. After destroying a Covenant cruiser, the Dawn found its final resting place on the surface of Requiem. Rest easy. You deserve it. Last but certainly not least, the Paris-class heavy frigate. The Paris follows the aesthetic motif and includes many of the same design features as her sisters. Externally mounted rear engines on port and starboard, externally mounted bridge, fusion drive for power and propulsion, 2 booms extending from the front to house its Mac and necessary systems. The key differences here are the size, use, and armament. The biggest frigate in the UNSC at the time, the Paris class measured in at 535 meters long, weighing 1.3 million tons. The Paris sports thicker titanium A battle plate than her forebears and is the most suited of them to engage in naval combat. The fusion drives on the Paris class also differ, with each wing housing 1 primary and 3 secondary engines. Beside the primary hangar bay found on the keel, the Paris can also be docked with via 2 airlocks on the bridge. This allows the bridge crew to move immediately from their stations to any orbital platforms or space stations with ease. The Paris class's armament is predictably greater than either the Stalwart or the Charon's, including 165 P-8V1 light Mac on its upper boom, 26 M58 Archer missile pods, 12 M870 Rampart point defense guns, 12 M2950 Harpoon nuclear missile silos, and 3 M2475 Shiva nuclear missile silos. Exact crew and complement numbers have not been disclosed, but we know that the Paris housed longswords and pelicans, making it the only UNSC frigate we know to deploy strike craft. While exact numbers aren't known, we can assume that the ship's heavy emphasis on space combat leaves little space on her decks for housing ground forces. This hasn't hindered the Paris class in becoming one of the most effective UNSC ships to grace the field, able to hold its own against Covenant battle cruisers and corvettes for extended periods, with varying results. Interestingly, a few UNSC formations centered around the Paris class have been described by Halo fleet battles. Arrowhead Formation, 3 Paris-class frigates focusing on use of their MAC weaponry over missile armaments. We can assume that this formation places a lot of weight on distance. You wouldn't want to employ this at close range, or else you'd constantly have to swing all of the ships around to aim the massive guns and stay in formation while doing it. Shield Formation, 4 Parises intended for defensive work. I'm imagining the Parises would be more static here. If defending a position, they'd probably still emphasize max until an enemy came close, only breaking formation for evasive maneuvers, and once any enemies got close, switching to missiles. Trident Formation, 3 Paris frigates balancing MAC and missile armaments evenly. Now this is the most versatile formation, and probably the one most employed, or swapped to. Everyone's got a formation until you get plasma lanced in the face, so to speak. The Shield Wall Battle Group would be a combination of 3 Paris-class shield formations, arranged to maximize MAC efficiency. The Harpy Specialist Battle Group employs 3 Arrowhead and 3 Trident formations, a total of 18 Parises, meant to overwhelm single Covenant capital ships. Other than that, I could see this battle group being used in case of an engagement with a more spread-out enemy battle group, either using missiles to intercept rapidly approaching targets, or maybe funneling them into the path of the MAC. The Paris was also favored for support roles in multiple formations. The Cyclops Specialist Battle Group formation saw 1 Marathon-class cruiser modified to work as a strike craft carrier, supported by 9 Paris-class frigates in Trident formation. I imagine even a large Covenant ship would be a bit intimidated if they saw this pop out of Impulse. The Barrage Specialist Battle Group employs 2 Marathons, each supported by 2 Parises, forming a multi-role formation. Lastly, the Gorgon Specialist Battle Group paired 2 Marathons supported by 1 Paris each and backed up by 2 Trident formations. There were many named or notable Paris-class heavy frigates deployed throughout the war. The Paris herself was a part of the home fleet during the Battle of Earth. Her current status was unknown, but she was one of the few ships able to follow In Amber Clad and Solemn Penance to Installation 05. The Androst is a Paris class that makes no appearances, but is featured in the Halo Encyclopedia with the hull code K201. The Commonwealth, commanded by Captain Wallace, was a Paris attacked by the Unrelenting, a Covenant Xanar-class cruiser, while transporting Dr. Catherine Halsey and the burgeoning Spartan IIs to the Damascus testing facility on Chesedi 4, where they would, for the first time, test their new Mjolnir armor systems, which would later become the very face of the Spartan program. The Commonwealth was able to fend her off long enough to get her passengers to the surface. After receiving their Mark IV Mjolnir for the first time, Blue Team was able to board the cruiser and destroy it from the inside, saving the Commonwealth and allowing it to fight another day, although sustaining heavy damage, including a crippled communication system, shaved armor plating, an overloaded ship AI memory core, a leak in the port fuel tank, Deck 13's entire destruction, its MAC taken offline, nearly 0% hull integrity, fires in sections 1 to 20, its port armor plating completely destroyed, and an extreme reduction in reactor efficiency. It's an absolute miracle this thing survived. Afterward, the Commonwealth was presumably repaired and probably continued to serve in the war before she was decommissioned and scrapped sometime before August 2552, when, on reach at the Azad shipbreaking yards, Noble 4 and Noble 6 fought through her hulk to deliver Cortana to the Pillar of Autumn. The UNSC Grafton and the UNSC Saratoga were both Paris-class frigates that provided air support for UNSC ground forces during the Battle of Zerdok Ridge on August 12, 2552. Grafton, famous for its unprecedented authorization to fire,
Not grounds, in atmosphere.
One way to get their attention. Hang on to your
was sadly destroyed directly after by the Long Night of Solace, a Covenant CSO-class supercarrier, which I wish didn't have such a cool name, which served as the harbinger of a much larger fleet led by then Supreme Commander Thel Vadami. The Saratoga narrowly escaped, and its activities afterward are unknown. The UNSC Savannah, probably the most notable Paris class, was another that took part in the fighting at Reach. She sacrificed her slipspace drive to be used as a makeshift bomb in an offensive action undertaken alongside a squadron of Sabres, a highly classified experimental fighter craft. The drive would be carried onto a nearby SDV-class Covenant corvette, which, once boarded and captured, would serve as the delivery device. Once the boarding party was inserted, the frigate made the mistake of remaining engaged with the corvette, leading to continued damage. Colonel Holland gave the order to disengage far too late, and the Savannah was destroyed. Oopsies happen. Once the corvette was in position, George 052 manually detonated the drive, destroying the CSO-class supercarrier. The Savannah had completed her mission. To what measure of success? We all know the answer.
Multiple Covenant signatures. Does anyone have a bit? They're everywhere! Yes, what? The whole damn Covenant fleet.
The UNSC Gettysburg served a critical role in the final year of the war. On July 17, 2552, the Gettysburg responded to a distress call from, get this, then Commander Jacob Key of the Iroquois Halberd-class light destroyer in the Sigma Octantis system. Joining the Iroquois only after the Keys loop, the frigate, among other ships, formed Battle Group Leviathan and successfully repelled Covenant forces in the Battle of Sigma Octantis IV. Afterward, the ship returned to Reach, where it was badly damaged in the ensuing battle. It was, quote, gutted from stem to stern when a Covenant energy projector obliterated the bridge and life support systems. All was not lost, though, for the Paris-class frigate, when the survivors of Installation 04 managed to board and capture the Ascendant Justice, a Ruma-pattern light carrier, which they used to return to Reach after discovering the High Prophet of Truth's massive fleet en route to Earth. When they arrived, Cortana informed the crew that the Ascendant Justice was in need of an extra power source to make faster slipspace jumps, and warn Earth of the coming threat. After they rendezvoused with Vice Admiral Danforth Whitcomb of the UNSC forces left on Reach, they eventually found the heavily damaged Gettysburg, its Mac and power generation still functioning. The UNSC forces repaired the Gettysburg long enough to be habitable, and attached the ship to the Ascendant Justice, forming the first ever human Covenant hybrid ship, the Gettysburg Ascendant Justice. Fucking awesome. Halsey used the Gettysburg's flash cloning facilities to treat the team while they replaced the bridge's shattered windows with armor plates, and placed monitors on them inside to make the bridge usable again, a setup which honestly should be more common anyway.
Why don't you give them more windows to look through?
Well, maybe I will. Maybe then someone might appreciate the aesthetics.
In order to buy time for Earth, Operation First Strike was initiated. With Spirit dropships reinforced by armor from the Gettysburg's hull, Blue Team boarded the unyielding Hierophant, a mobile repair and refit station. After losing Grace, the team set the station's reactors to overload, destroying it, slowing the fleet's plans, but not enough to stop their advance. While all this occurred, the Gettysburg was separated by the Ascendant Justice, which moved into the outer reaches of the system to perform reconnaissance. Upon realizing the fleet was still fully capable of moving on Earth, the Ascendant Justice, piloted by Vice Admiral Whitforth and Elias Haverson, lured Covenant ships closer to the unyielding Hierophant. 12 Covenant warships were caught in the blast, as well as the Ascendant Justice and the 2 officers. However, the Ascendant Justice's slipspace drive had been removed and placed into the Gettysburg, and Cortana initiated a random jump in accordance with the Cole Protocol and promptly returned to Earth. There, the Gettysburg docked at the Borneo space tether, and Fred and Linda informed Oni of the coming threat. The UNSC Promise of Dawn was present for the Battle of Reach in some capacity, and was the home of the smart AI Gabriella. Gabriella was unique in that she is the only AI that contains the entirety of human history in her data storage. The Promise of Dawn was assumed lost until the next year, when Oni received a distress call from the Covenant planet Sefun 3. She'd crashed there, and her survivors had set up a makeshift settlement, which was destroyed by Jul Mdama. Also on the planet, wanted scientist Dr. Chen Bax was in possession of Gabriella, and wasn't keen on handing her over. Due to the sensitive nature of the situation, Linda 058 was dispatched alone to recover the AI and eliminate the Doctor, whom Oni considered to be a liability. Linda found that Chen had become disillusioned with Oni and was outwardly hostile to Linda when she arrived, along with his loyal band of fellow survivors. Once the Covenant remnant began to move toward the settlement and its occupants, Chen implored Linda to save them, and detonated the reactor of the Promise of Dawn. The explosion triggered an avalanche that wiped out a large portion of the Covenant ground forces, allowing his followers to escape with the Spartan. The Cascadia was deployed to the planet Clael in 2556 after the planet was glassed by a Covenant remnant faction. Commanded by Captain French and his massive head, their mission was search and rescue. The Cascadia carried with her Marines, ODSTs, and the Army's 412th Engineering Command. Sergeant Holly Tanaka was among the group of ODSTs and Marines deployed via Pelican to rescue survivors. After engaging and dispatching a group of Kigyar scavengers, they transported the civilians to safety aboard the Cascadia. There were several frigates that must have been one of these 3 due to their appearance in the timeline, however were not adequately described in the sources they appear in. FFG 427 and FFG 502 are frigates that participated in the Defense of Concord in 2551, and that is all that is known about them. The UNSC Allegiance and the UNSC Fair Weathers are described as frigates in the Fall of Reach novel. They arrived alongside the Gettysburg in response to Keyes' distress signal, reinforcing the Iroquois and later participating in the Battle of Sigma Octantis IV. The Fairweather was destroyed when it collided with a Covenant destroyer, but, with its missiles, made sure its attacker also did not survive the engagement. The UNSC Purpose is referred to as a frigate by Halsey in her journal. It fought at the human colony Bliss alongside 2 cruisers, the UNSC Weeping Willows and Matador, against a Covenant fleet of 45 warships. Needless to say, they did not come out victorious. The UNSC Agincourt was a frigate sent to the Forerunner shield world Onyx to deliver supplies to Camp Currahee, a top-secret UNSC military base that served as the training facility to Alpha, Beta, and Gamma Company. All of Gamma Company, including Mark. Gamma Company Mark. Subscribe. As it was leaving, the Agincourt was requested to investigate unusual noises from Zone 67 of Onyx. There, the ship was attacked by the recently reactivated Onyx Sentinels and subsequently destroyed. The UNSC Swift Justice was described as long and blocky, with a bifurcated bow and a squat command deck atop its back, which, the ship didn't really do anything notable, it just existed, and deployed troops to investigate an abandoned UNSC passenger ship. In September 2517, the UNSC Journeyman was deployed to escort the UNSC Dartmouth, but before they reached their charge, the Dartmouth was captured by insurrectionist forces. The UNSC Ready or Not, cool name, was a frigate in service in 2535, and while patrolling encountered the UNSC Midsummer Night, remember the Midsummer Night from earlier, along with the insurrectionist survivors following the Battle of the Rubble. The UNSC Tannenberg was active in 2535, and assisted the UNSC Circumference, a prowler, in the search for Kurt 051, who had gone missing in the area. The search was fruitless, and due to Covenant presence, had to be called off. And finally, the UNSC Tripping Light was a frigate of unknown classification, and following taking extensive damage during a battle in 2547, its slipspace drive was scheduled to be dismantled. Halsey, however, had a different plan in mind for the drive. She chose it for her unsanctioned private testing with an experiment to create an abstract fractal within slipspace for housing AI. Whatever the hell that means. And that is every class of frigate up until 2552 and ship of the line ever mentioned in the Halo Expanded Universe. Now, my thoughts. I like them. I mean, who doesn't like UNSC frigates? They're the first thing I think of when I think of the UNSC, even if they're not my favorite ship. I saw a comment asking about the exposed bridges on UNSC ships. Specifically, they were talking about the Halberd, but it's especially egregious on these. I'm somewhat inclined to agree because starships don't need bridges, they really don't. There's a reason why real-life spacecraft mostly use sensors and radar to navigate, as well as Earth-based sensors. Really, the rockets we use are extremely dependent on ground-based navigation, but still. It's 2552. If you're really so inclined to see outside, you could use cameras, as they did on board the Gettysburg. But on the other hand, I think it sort of makes sense for the bridge to be exposed. These ships are really skeletal. They are the epitome of put some propulsion on a gun design philosophy that the UNSC likes. There's really nothing on these ships that isn't absolutely necessary, which leaves a lot of empty-looking space on it, especially when compared to something like the Marathon class, a big spinning pillar of battle plate. I think these ships might just be small enough that the exposed bridge is a negligible issue. I'm interested to see what you all think in the comments. Post-war, the frigates of the UNSC are totally different, to the point where I'm doing a part 2 just to emphasize those differences. Only the Mulsanne class really keeps most of the classic frigate design, but we'll get to that in part 2. Other than that, thank you all for your patience. It's taken a while to research, write, record, gather footage and images, edit, and process all this video alongside having school and work and stuff to do. I would just love it if you'd subscribe. That would make me happy, and then I'd endeavor to make you happy with a new ship breakdown and lore video whenever I can. Thank you all for watching this long-ass video. If you made it this far, comment, "Get this, Captain Jacob Keyes." The Bellicose was commissioned as the UNSC fuck me. In 2535, the Midsummer Night was tasked with In 2535, the Midsummer Night was tasked with enforcing the Cole Protocol. In 2535, the Midsummer Night was tasked with enforcing the Cole Protocol in the fall. At the end of the Battle of Mombasa, solemn penance. All we know about this frigate is that she was present for the Battle of Reach and she presided for Christina Aguilera.